I learned stuff from my gardening. Uh, there's a scripture that was one of my dad's favorite scriptures, and it was about how we get worried and how we get concerned and how we try to manage our lives like by ourselves, like the beginning of the song. There was a time when I thought I had to do it all myself, and this scripture speaks about how we get harried about life a lot. About a few hours before our mother died, Tim and I and the family, we were all in the hospital, and Mom was going to the other world and then coming back and speaking some revelations. And one of her revelations is she said, "Kids, kids," and we were all in there, her grandkids and all of us, and she got our attention. Like she had been out for a while, and I didn't know she was going to come back or be able to speak before her transition time. And she just came back with all this energy. Kids, kids, you don't have to get caught up in the rat race. And it was this big revelation. My mom was one of the busiest people I've ever met, like doing all kinds of stuff to forward heaven on planet Earth and equal rights for everyone. And it was this revelation, you don't have to get caught up in the rat race. And it meant something specific to each of us who were in that hospital room. It's like, she said that for me. And I got to think about, why is it that one of the last messages Mom wants to give to me is, you don't have to get caught up in the rat race. And I live in the country, I work in the cities, but I was thinking, oh, my life is so not a rat race. I mean, I live next to cows and horses and sheep and woods and streams, and I work in my garden, and I paint my paintings, and I write my poetry, and I write my books. And so I never would have thought of me as someone who was caught up in a rat race. And I looked as I meditated on it. My rat race that I was caught up in wasn't the hustle and bustle of outside activity. Tim's was. Tim was living in Manhattan, and he was working for Faith Popcorn, who was internationally known as one of the most influential people and knowledgeable people in the field of identifying trends. And she has become a very wealthy woman, and she has an office full of people who throughout the years have met each other after they weren't in the office anymore and went, "How long did you last?" "Oh, I lasted a year." "You lasted a year?" Because in my experience of visiting Timothy, Faith Popcorn's people were always on call. I mean, I thought being on call as the pastor of a small church was on call, but Faith could call them at any time, day or night, and give them an assignment to fulfill. She could call a spontaneous meeting, and they had to get up and go. So for me, it was like the rat race that I am caught up in isn't like working in a big corporation or a company in Manhattan. I'm just there in my garden, but sometime in that garden, I'm caught up in a psychological rat race. I have told you, I've confessed to everybody that the way my mind works, I've always been a creative person. And my dad used to tell me sometime, in between plays, I was always doing theater. And sometime if one of my plays ended, within a couple of months, my dad would say, "Carly, you've got to get into another play. Because when you are not doing drama on stage, you are doing drama off stage. Get in another play. If there are no castings, write one. Write one and cast yourself, because you're dramatic." And I've always been dramatic and artistic. So it's no surprise to me that my mind, being so actively creative, can turn a slight case of indigestion into stomach cancer that's going to kill me after it makes me poor. And it's a mild case of indigestion, but my mind gets caught up in a rat race and can catastrophize like nobody's business. I've told people, if you think you can catastrophize, it can't be nothing compared to me. So that was my rat race. Within a few months after Mom died, Timothy called and said, the rat race Mom was talking to me about was working here with Faith Popcorn. And he said, in the wake of Mom's death, I can't do this. I can't devote my energy into this high-powered, awesome-paying job. So if it's okay with you, me and my wife and child would love to move back to Massachusetts. And the great thing about him in New York, he maintained his financial investment in the house in Massachusetts. So really, he didn't even have to ask me, can we move back? He could have just called and said, we're moving back, because he had the authority to do that. But this scripture that was one of my dad's favorites, it kind of talks about how we spend so much energy with all of the daily needs that have to be met. Like, I cannot possibly believe I'm required to remember so many numbers, period. Phone numbers, numbers to open my phone. I have to remember passwords. So many of them. And I'm not good at remembering passwords. I may use the password for one of my little gadgets on the wrong gadget. And I could go, I know it's the right password. And it takes like Tim to come along and say, no, bro. So keeping up with just the day-to-day activities of the world, and I got to earn the money for my food. I have to shop and get my food. I have to cook my food. I have to clean up after I've eaten my food. That one alone is a day-to-day thing. This scripture says, consider the lilies of the field, Carlos. They don't get freaked out like you do. He said, they toil not, neither do they spin. And you're just toiling and spinning as you earn your daily bread and live your life. Consider the lilies of the field and how they grow. They toil not, Carlos, neither do they spin. Yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed as one of these. And so that scripture is in my brain, and I'm always considering the lilies. I've told you some of this, or some of you have heard me speak this, but I got to speak it every spring and summer because I get reminded of so much by considering the flowers. When I'm out in my garden, I feel like I'm in school. I notice these things. I've had times in my life where the challenges and the trials and the tribulations seem like they just came one after another, and it's like, what's going on? And I'm feeling like I'm in the dark and I can't see the light and what's going on. And I go outside, and in the morning the sun's over there and all of my lilies are bent toward the sun. And then I go out in the afternoon and the sun's back here. And those rascals that were bent facing the east are now facing the south. And then I go out later and now the sun's in the west. And those rascals have turned from the south and are now looking west. Even my little house plants do the same. The ones by the window are bent out the window. I have to revolve those things and turn them around because they are determined to face the sun. They know where their life comes from. And so sometimes I look at my lilies and I go, what are they preaching to you, Reverend Carlos? They're preaching to me that if I cannot if it appears to me as though the light is not in my circumstance, it's simply that I'm bent the wrong way. I'm leaning in toward the wrong thing. I'm leaning into the shadow rather than the light. At Timothy's party last night, one of my neighbors sat next to me. He knows who he's sitting next to. He knows I'm Reverend Carlos. He produces some of my sermons over the years, so he's seen my DVDs from when I preach here in New York and Connecticut and everywhere that I've been. So he knew who he was sitting next to, but he sat down next to me wanting me to support him in being a victim. Being a victim of living in the United States of America where the middle class is not being serviced. He said it would be better to be poor because the poor people, they've got it good. And of course the rich people, they've got it good. But we who are living in the middle, like me and my wife and family, for us, life sucks. I said, why are you sitting next to me talking this crap? You know I'm not going to support you in this. How dare you? How dare you? Like, who are you comparing yourself to? And he goes, well, in France, the citizens have so-and-so advantages. He named 3 countries that if he lived there, he would be doing better as a middle-class male. And I went, compare yourself with 90% of the rest of the world, because it's relative. And he tried. He said, okay, you're doing your reverend thing. Can you just not do your reverend thing? And could you just support me in feeling sorry for myself just while I'm at the party? And I went, Kale, no. Kale, no, I can't support you while you're at this party. You could have sat next to anybody. There are some people at this party you could sit next to and they will agree with you that it sucks being a middle-class white male in America right now. But I'm not your guy. Go sit next to somebody else. Because all I can think about is how blessed we are. Each and every one of us. They live, it's a fixer-upper, but he and his wife live in one of the mansions in Massachusetts. I told him, dude, you could rent out 8 rooms in your house. And you could be bringing in such an income. And he right away, no, but that wouldn't work for me. I'm not the kind of person. I said, you just want to be on the pity pot. And so, sit somewhere else, not next to me, and cry and sob and wail and moan all you want. But I can't take it from me. I sure ain't gonna take it from you. Consider the lilies. I'll tell you another thing about where I live. The ground in Montague, Massachusetts is literally filled with rocks. So every time I plant seed or bulbs in my yard, I have to dig and hit rocks and move rocks and hit rocks and move rocks. And then I put my little seed or my bulb in that ground, and then I cover them back up, and I go, I just buried them alive. Sometimes I think I am being buried alive by all my bills, by everything that's going on in the world. I've never been buried alive, but I buried a lot of growing things alive. And there's one thing I know. They're not going to be under there complaining about how rocky this Montague soil is. What they're going to do is those seeds are eventually going to break open, and the most tender, delicate, fragile little sprout is going to come out of that seed. So fragile. And it's going to make its way up through this dark earth where Carlos buried us alive. And it's going to hit a rock, and it's not going to do a Carlos. What's this rock doing here? How many bills can I possibly pay? What more can happen in the world? That's what I do sometime when I hit a rock. But not these tender, fragile little green things. They hit a rock and they just simply turn, keep growing sideways and then upward. They don't care that it's rocky soil, and they don't care how tender and fragile they might appear to be. They prove to me every year, that they have stick-to-itiveness. They have a willingness to just move around the rocks and keep on growing. Because even when they can't see the light, they know it's there. Because like your reading that you gave us today, Brother David, they know what's inside them. They know that God is inside them. And so they just keep moving. So sometimes that's the sermon that they give me on that day. Tim's grandmother visited us a day, and I had been buying a flowering plant, and some of you have heard me say this. This beautiful, I never even bothered to learn what they're called, but they hang over the pots, and they're delicate, beautiful little flowers. And I bought 2 pots of flowers to hang by my doors every year. And every year within weeks, within like a few weeks, they just started dying off on me. And my neighbors had them, which is where I got the idea to buy them. And my neighbors never died. Everywhere I looked around the neighborhood, how come everybody's able to keep these things alive but me? I consider myself to be pretty good with plants. So I started guesstimating. Maybe I'm not giving them enough water. So I gave them more water, and they kept on dying. Or maybe I'm giving them too much water now. Just kind of do a mid-ground. They kept dying. Maybe they knew new dirt. I gave them new dirt. They kept dying. Maybe they need some fertilizer. I gave them some fertilizer. They kept dying. Maybe they need a sunnier spot. Put them in a sunnier spot. They kept dying. Maybe they need shadier. I put them in the shade. They kept dying. Nothing I did. I prayed over them. I gave them Reiki. I sang to them. They kept on dying. And I actually tried to convince myself that if I can't keep them alive, nobody can. And therefore, all of the flowers like this that I see on my neighbors' porches, they're clearly fake. They are obviously a very well-made silk flower fake thing, because they can't keep them alive. This dude can't. And so I thought, well, at some point I'll find out where I can get some silk flowers, because they just don't last. And then one day Tim's grandmother was visiting us, and she went out on my deck where I had one of these flowers, and she was out there, and I went inside to make some food or do something else, and I was away for about 20 minutes, and when I got back, his grandmother, Rita, is sitting there on this porch chair, and around, and the pot's right here, and on the floor, she has been picking off all these dead blooms. And there's 50 or 60 of them. And I go, Rita, what are you doing? And she said, I'm deadheading your plant. I had never heard of deadheading. I went, what's deadheading? She was like, I'm removing all the dead blooms. And I went, well, they're just going to keep dying. There's just a few that aren't. And she went, no, Carlos. If you don't remove the dead blossoms, the new blossoms can't come. She said, what this plant does, the dead ones, the life force in this plant keeps trying to keep what is dead alive. Keeps trying to resurrect what is dead and no longer useful. Well, my mouth dropped open and I went, oh my God, what a sermon this is being preached to me. How many dead blossoms are in my life that my life force is trying to keep them alive, but their time is over. And when Rita left, I sat down in my room and I meditated. And I got a slip of paper and a pen, and I wrote down 7 things that in my life are dead blossoms, that I've been using so much time and energy and life force trying to make them not dead, trying to keep them. And I looked and went, These 7 things are dead blossoms. If I simply deadhead them from my life, I wonder how much more life force will be available to me. And I got to tell you, it made the most amazing change. I felt years younger. I had pep in my step like I thought I would never have again. Oh, that's when you're 20, you have that kind of pep. It youthed me. I suddenly had so much excitement about life because I was trying to keep some relationships that were dead on my branches. I had to let them go. I was trying to keep some things I wanted that were gone. I had people who had been literally dead for years that I was arguing with the fact that they were dead. I want Dad back. I want my brother back. I want Johnny back. It was a dead flower. And I went, you've got to let them go. You've got to go. Dad's dead. Chuck's dead. Johnny's dead. Sally's dead. None of your arguing with this is going to bring them back. You have to release that and put your life force into something living. 2 weeks after Rita came to our house, that plant had completely resurrected itself. It was as beautiful as all of my neighbors, and I knew that it didn't need to be silk or fake. It just needed to be tended to. My final one is pulling weeds. I was the best weed puller as a kid. My dad loved me in the garden because if he said pull a weed, I pulled a weed out by its roots. My brother right next to me wanted to pull them really fast so he could go play baseball. So my brother discovered it is a quicker process to simply snap the weeds off right at the ground level. And when Dad came home from work, it would look like they were pulled. But he snapped them off and ran to the ball field. And it rained. And those weeds were still there. My dad never had to ask which row did Carlos weed and which row did Chuck weed. Because the rows that I weeded, it could rain 4 or 5 times or 6 or 7 times before a brand new weed began to make its way up that I was going to pull out by the root. Some of us believe that we have weeded the garden of our mind, but I'll tell you, you'll know you haven't if the same reoccurring theme keeps coming up. I know people who have for years been, pray that I will forgive my mother. Pray that I will be able to let Mom off the hook. And every service, every gathering, pray that I let my mother off the hook. And, okay, well, you have to forgive her, have you? Yep. And the next week, she's making me crazy. Well, you probably snapped that weed off right at the surface. You didn't pull it up by the root. So these are some of the things that I learned from my garden and get to remember about my garden. So if the sun is in the east, I suggest you lean in toward the east. If it is in the south, I suggest you lean toward the south. You need to be facing the sun. If you're not facing the sun, you will be looking at darkness and shadow reality. I also suggest that the next time you hit a rock in your growth, you don't complain about it or think something's wrong. You simply turn to the right or the left and just go around the rock and keep seeking the light, even though you might not be able to see it. I also suggest that if you want the flower that you are to stay alive fully, get a piece of paper and ask yourself, do I need to do some deadheading? Are there some dead blossoms in my mind and in my heart that it's time for me just to pull off so that the life force that is within me can bring more blooming to my life. I learned it from the garden. I gave it to you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.